Elon Musk has this amazing new idea to enhance his Tesla cars by adding SpaceX rocket technology to them.
I personally really think this is actually going to be happening, and he tends to not joke around with too much stuff like this. He really loves making the ludicrous happen.
I mean, just think about that for a second. How awesome it would be to have the most modern SpaceX technology on a Tesla.
Not saying the next gen Roadster's special upgrade package will definitely enable it to fly short hops, but maybe. Certainly possible. Just a question of safety. Rocket tech applied to a car opens up revolutionary possibility.
Clear that the rocket car finally flew.
Well, actually no. It's a really, really stupid idea. And to show why, I'll be calling on a guy who Elon Musk fans probably think is somewhat of an authority on the subject. 1. Elon Musk. Now, on my last video where I was just showing some of the practical difficulties of dealing with compressed gas, there were lots of comments that said Elon Musk was just joking here. He wasn't serious. It's kind of difficult to sustain that when you see some of his other tweets. David Jenkins writes, I reckon it's an adapted cold gas thruster used in their upper stage rocket guidance using plain old compressed air, to which Elon Musk replies, using the configuration you described plus an electric pump to replenish air when car power draw drops below max power output makes sense. But we're going to go a lot further. Yeah, he's talking about how he's going to implement this. Doesn't sound like he's joking to me.
We're going to put rocket thrusters on it.
For real?
Yes.
What are they going to burn?
Nothing. Ultra high pressure compressed air.
Whoa. Just
gas,
air?
cold gas thrusters.
So why is this such a stupid idea? Well, let's start with the most obvious question of all. So what are cold gas thrusters? Well, it's pretty much what it says on the bottle, the compressed gas bottle. So that's all you do is you get a cylinder of compressed gas, air say for instance, and then you just open it up, the gas comes out, and you get some thrust because of that. About, what is this? About 50 bar of argon. So we get ourselves steady. And fire! Woo! The downside is, of course, they don't provide much thrust. In fact, they are some of the least efficient thrusters that you can get. Now, compressed gas as an energy storage system isn't quite modern SpaceX technology. This is one of the oldest ideas out there. I mean, really old. The first torpedoes ran on, you guessed it, compressed air. All right, it wasn't a cold gas thruster. They fed it through a little internal combustion engine type thing that ran the propeller. But there's a big problem with using compressed gas like this as energy storage, and that's as you vent it quickly, it gets cold, really quite quickly. It's a thermodynamic property. You cannot get around it. And that means that you get a lot of thrust at the beginning, and then its ability to provide thrust gets progressively less as the gas gets colder. Now, this has been known about for over a century, so the very first torpedo designers tried things to get around this. First of all, you put some big radiator fins to sort of try and get some heat into that cooling gas, which of course increases the energy that you get out of that compressed gas. Or even better, why not just inject the fuel straight into the compressed gas in this little engine thing, and hey presto, you've more or less got an internal combustion engine. Apart from, it doesn't have to compress the gas from the atmosphere because it's coming directly from a compressed gas bottle. In fact, if you look at it like that, this is basically what cold gas thrusters basically are. With a regular rocket engine, you inject fuel and an oxidant into a combustion chamber. It burns, there is a big expansion of gas, and that's what provides your thrust. However, you can pretty much do the same thing, but you just don't add the fuel. The downside is, of course, it's a cold gas thruster. It doesn't provide much thrust. In fact, they're almost bottom of the barrel in terms of how much thrust you get per kilo of propellant. Now, you may have noticed, just looking around, that you don't see many cold gas thrusters around on cars, while internal combustion engines are fairly common. And there are two very, very good reasons for this. Or more to the point, there are very, very good reasons why Elon Musk's idea of putting cold gas thrusters, both to help the car maneuver and maybe make it fly, is a really stupid idea. And this is the moment that you've waited for, where we call on the guy who Elon Musk fans probably think of as the greatest authority on this sort of thing. Billionaire and the inventor of the wheel, the hyperdisk, Elon Musk.
There are some drawbacks to flying cars. They are essentially it's a helicopter with wheels, and they make a lot of noise. There's a lot of wind force, and the probability of something falling on your head if there are a bunch of flying cars around is much higher than if there are not.
So you got it. That's why flying cars are completely impractical. They make too much noise, and they create too much air blast. The fact that cold gas thrusters are bloody noisy.
Chamber is about 100 psi. Here we go.
And it doesn't really make any difference whether you get the thrust from a cold gas thruster or from a propeller. In both cases, you're accelerating gas to provide lift. Or thrust. The air blast's going to be almost exactly the same in both cases. I mean, look, let's just get on the same page here. This is a 50-litre cylinder. Here I have a 50-litre gas bottle, and it weighs about 50 kilos, which is pretty heavy, to the point where, if I'm in good shape, I should just about like that, be able to lift it just about. So they're pretty heavy, these things. Now, this one's actually argon, but we're going to assume for the sake of argument it's compressed air, as it would be with Elon Musk's cold gas thrusters. So let's assume this is an air cylinder for the moment. So if I take the top off this cylinder and it's at 1 atmosphere pressure, then the volume of the cylinder is 50 litres. The density of air is about 1 gram per litre, so there would be about 50 grams in this cylinder. Now if I put twice as much gas in the cylinder, the pressure goes up to 2 atmospheres, 2 bar, and the amount of gas in the cylinder goes from 50 grams to 100 grams. And now if I go from 2 bar to 20 bar, another order of magnitude, 20 atmospheres, then it goes from 100 grams in the cylinder to 1 kilo. And if I go from 20 bar up to 200 bar, 200 atmospheres, then there's going to be about 10 kilos of gas in this cylinder. And as it turns out, so at the moment the cylinder is closed. This is the primary regulator, which tells me how much pressure there is in this cylinder. And it's just short of 200 atmospheres. And then I've got a secondary regulator here who's going to tell me what the pressure is. So I'm just going to put on, I don't know, a couple of bar. Right? And we're going to open it. So that's just a couple of bar. A couple of bar I can hold with my finger. Not that big of a deal. If I jack this up to, 6 bar, yeah, it gets harder to hold with my finger. Alright, and if we jack it up to about 10 bar, it now gets really difficult to hold with my finger. I really can't do it. Right, that's 10 bar. If I take this off and open the cylinder, that's 200 bar, which, as you can tell, is going to be loud. So let me get a wrench and I'll do that. Okay. So this is now going to be 200 bar, okay? Alright, make sure you're actually braced into the wall. Loud enough? So, whew, it's quite a blast comes off that. But anyway, so that's what 200 bar looks like. And that's basically what Elon Musk would be proposing to use to accelerate and decelerate his cars, which is an absolute farce on so many levels. Now, for certain, there is quite a lot of destructive energy packed into these high-pressure gas bottles. Hell, you know what originally caused this? Well, it's going to take the sound a little time to get here, but the first thing you're going to hear is the sound of a high-pressure helium gas bottle failing. Then the sound of the explosion arrives. Yep, it was a high-pressure helium bottle failing and rupturing the propellant tanks. This is why the cheapest and safest way to handle high-pressure gases is in big steel cylinders like this. And even those at their cheapest are about $100 per shot. Now, sure, you can about halve the weight of these cylinders if you don't mind about the cost, and make them out of composite materials like Elon Musk wants to do with his car. But this will greatly increase the price. Maybe not something you want to be doing if you're laying off people to try and get the prices of your cars down. But all of these cylinders take in the region of 200 bar, because that's when it really gets quite difficult to contain all of this energy. I mean, just to give you a feel on these things, for the safety limits, these big steel cylinders are only allowed to be pressurized to 1/2 of their failure limit, because you don't want to go near the failure limit. And with the composite cylinders, it's 1/5 of the failure limit. Why? Well, 200 odd bar is a lot of pressure, and you have to respect your high pressure gases. 14 pounds per square inch, 14 psi, is about 1 bar, but whatever. Let's not worry too much about the little numbers. Let's just say about 10 psi is 1 bar.
Blast injuries to exposed personnel, represented by this dummy, is usually severe over 3 psi. Here it was 6 psi.
So this was about a 1/2 bar overpressure, and it throws a guy around like this. A 200 bar overpressure of a rupturing cylinder is terrifying. It's something you don't want to be anywhere near, let alone being on the inside of a car with one of those cylinders. One of these cylinders rupturing in your car means all but certain death. But if you want an idea of the thrust that you can get out of a cylinder like this,
The valve has sheared clean off, and that's a very good sign. It looks like the cylinder flew straight and true. At 40 miles per hour, the air tank turned the cinder block to cinders.
You know, this was an optimum situation for this tank. What this tank did is as good as it gets.
well, okay, I'm going to assume the Mythbuster cylinder is about a 200 bar cylinder like mine that weighs about 50 kilos. Those numbers are probably in the right ballpark. And when they opened up this cylinder, it accelerated to 40 miles per hour,
At 40 miles per hour,
which is about 18 meters per second. And so the energy is just half mv squared, which is about 8,000 joules, 8 kilojoules, enough energy to shoot this bottle some 50 feet, 15 odd meters into the sky. So if we were to put that 8 kilojoules of energy into our Tesla, how fast would it be going? Well, a Tesla weighs about 2 tons, so half of the mass is about 1 ton, 1,000 kilos. So V squared is going to be about 8. So V is going to be about 3 meters per second, about 7 miles per hour, that sort of thing. Not looking so good here.
But this one may be the slowest ever.
But hey, these are just some ballpark numbers from cylinders losing valves.
You know, this was an optimum situation for this tank. What this tank did is as good as it gets.
How would the rocketry people approach this?
So hold on, this is all actually kind of coming together. There is some serious possibility here. I can't believe it. But wait, I should totally believe it. I mean, after all, I have played around with fire extinguisher powered hovercraft.
Now, rocketry folk have a way of working out how much bang for the buck you can get out of your propellant. Whilst it's correct, it's not necessarily the most obvious. You see, here on Earth, we typically equate weight to mass because they're essentially the same thing, seeing as gravity is essentially a constant here on Earth. And yeah, this makes them pretty interchangeable numbers. However, technically they're not. Mass is mass, while weight is, like thrust, is a force. It's a mass times by an acceleration, the acceleration that you experience due to gravity. So, say my mass is 100 kilos, that means my weight is 1,000 newtons. Now, specific impulse is how much thrust you get in 1 second per 1 kilo of fuel. But they express that 1 kilo as a force, as a weight. And somewhat confusingly, if you actually go through all the numbers here, you find that this metric actually has units of seconds. But it's basically how much bang for the buck do you get out of 1 kilo of fuel. So a simple example, the Saturn V had a takeoff mass of about 3,000 tons, 3 million kilograms, or its weight was 30 million newtons. So, if you want to take this thing off, the thrust that the rocket is providing must be equal to its weight. You need to provide 30 million newtons of thrust. Well, the specific impulse of the Saturn V engines was about 260 seconds. So the kilograms of fuel you need to burn per second is about 30 million divided by 2,600, which means you consume about 11 tons of propellant per second, which is about right.
Yes, another opportunity to talk about both Teslas and rocket science. I couldn't be more excited. Let's get started.
So cool. A Tesla mass is about 2 tons, 2,000 kilograms, or 20,000 newtons. The specific impulse of a cold gas thruster is about 70 seconds. 20,000 divided by 700 is about 30 kilograms per second. And seeing as you only get about 10 kilos in one of these cylinders, you would need 3 of these cylinders just to get your Tesla off the ground for 1 second. But hey, this is the best case scenario, that you get near the optimum 70 or so seconds of specific impulse from your cold gas thruster. In reality, you're going to get nowhere near that, because the amount of useful thrust that you get out of a cylinder drops as the pressure drops. So, if you have, say, a 50 or so litre cylinder with 200 atmospheres in it, 200 bar in it, each bar that you put into that cylinder extra has about the same mass. They all weigh about 50 grams. So if you're venting the cylinder, you get a lot more thrust out of the first 50 or so grams that comes out of the cylinder, venting it from 200 bar down to 199 bar, than you're going to get out of it when you vent the 50 grams going from 2 bar down to 1 bar. I mean, here's a nice simple example using my low pressure compressor, which only goes up to just under 10 bar. This is going to be about 8 bar that we're looking at here on my reaction control system. Let's get steady and wow, impressive stuff, eh? Here I've got a compressor, and that tells you the pressure in the compressor. So at the moment it's empty, and it's sat on top of a balance with the exhaust from the compressor pointing upwards. So this will essentially measure our thrust, and it'll weigh it within 10 or so grams. And just to give you a ballpark feel of the sort of thrust that we're going to get off this thing, that's a chocolate bar, Mounds in America, Bounty in England, and they weigh about 60 grams. So that should chalk in at 60 grams. Okay, so let's fill up the compressor first and see how much thrust we can get off about, I think this thing goes up to 8 bar. Good, so now we have about 8 bar in the compressor tank. So I'm going to zero this. Then I'm just going to hold the exhaust open as we can get, and And that's it. So you can instantly see the problem that you only get the good thrust of a cold gas thruster at high pressure. So this up here is going to be a specific impulse of, let's say, 70 seconds. And then, of course, 0 is 0, which means on average, if you're just going to empty a cylinder, you're only going to get a specific impulse of about half the maximum value. Which in practice means it's not 3 cylinders like this that you have to empty in 1 second to lift your Tesla off the ground. You have to empty about 6 cylinders like this just to lift your Tesla off the ground for 1 second. And at which point we can probably step back and address all the Elon Musk fans who have been complaining like crazy, saying, yes, but you assumed his car weighed 2 tons when it actually weighed something like 1.7. Well, yes, if you now include the weight of 6 of these cylinders, which is about 300 kilos, his car weighs about 2 tons. But that's nothing. We're not even started yet, because that was me being generous. You see, Elon's talking about using an electric pump. I think a compressor is the technical term, to replenish the air when the car power draw drops below max pack power output. Makes sense, but we're going to go a lot further. I'm not so sure about that, Elon. I mean, it's a great idea, using compressors on board the car to give you unlimited instant thrust, just at the push of a button. It's that simple. I wonder how long it'll take to fill those cylinders. Now, obviously, you're going to need a high-pressure air compressor, something that'll go up to about 200 bar. Bear in mind, this is just an electric 10 bar gas compressor with a tiny reservoir. So you're going to need something like this, which weighs about 50 kilograms. The compressor alone weighs about as much as one of these big gas bottles. And it pumps about 100 litres of air per minute. Now you'll recall that 100 litres of air weighs about 100 grams, so 0.1 of a kilo per minute. And to fill a cylinder like this with 10 kilograms of gas, that means you would have to have this thing running for about 100 minutes, about 2 hours, just to fill 1 cylinder.
So the air pump could draw power from the power pack whenever there's spare power to be had, which is apparently most of the time.
And bear in mind, you've got to fill 6 cylinders like this just to get your car off the ground for 1 second. So with just one 50 kilogram compressor, it would take about 12 hours to fill all 6 cylinders. Or, if you went for 10 or so compressors, half a ton of compressors in your car, you could probably get that down to 1 hour. Sure, the weight of your car would be almost entirely compressors and cylinders, and it might be quite noisy having all those compressors in your car, but you might be able to get it to fly for 1 second. Now at the moment, you may have noticed that I've kept everything down to basically a 50 litre, 200 bar cylinder. It's a useful, used benchmark, because that's when the safety limits for these things typically run out. However, apparently Elon Musk wants to go up to the best part of 1,000 bar.
Now, do you have to have air tanks, or are they just sucking the air out of it? Okay.
Yeah, just have an electric pump.
Whoa.
Pump it up to like 10,000 psi.
And how fast are we talking? 0 to 60?
How fast do you want to go?
In a giant gas cylinder on the back seat of his car.
Coincide with Elon's reply to me on Twitter asking how big the COPVs would need to be in order to have a substantial impact on performance. His response would be that they replace the back seats of the Roadster with the COPV tanks.
I mean, let's just ignore that by the time you get up to that sort of pressure, you need 5-stage compressors. Where he's going to put it, I'm not entirely certain. But really, let me just put 10,000 psi, which is what Elon Musk is proposing, into perspective. The chamber pressure of a howitzer when it's firing maxes out at about 5 times the pressure of the cylinder that Elon Musk wants to put in on the back seat of his car. Yeah, the backseat of his car is now literally a bomb. But what if rather than trying to get the car off the ground, you use that to augment acceleration or for emergency braking? Well, 6 cylinders or so will get you an acceleration of 10 meters per second squared for about 1 second. So it gives you a velocity of about 10 meters per second. That's not bad. That's like 20 miles per hour. But on the downside, you can only do it for 1 second every 12 or so hours. And all it took was adding another half or so ton of weight to the car and turning your car into a compressed air death trap. Not that any of this remotely matters anyway, because Elon Musk himself pointed out the problem with using air to accelerate cars.
There are some drawbacks to flying cars. They are essentially it's a helicopter with wheels, and they make a lot of noise. There's a lot of wind force, and the probability of something falling on your head if there are a bunch of flying cars around is much higher than if there are not.
Doesn't matter whether you're getting that air thrust from cold gas thrusters or propellers. It just creates way too much noise and way too much air blast. Having 200 bar gas jets on the back of your car is just a recipe for inadvertently killing anyone who happens to be standing behind your car at the touch of a button. But what really gets me is just how devoted the cult of Musk is to such crazy ideas. I mean, you only have to look at the videos that I've done on the most demonstrably stupid ideas of Elon Musk. And it seems to be a fairly simple correlation. The more stupid the idea is, and the easier it is to debunk, the more the cult of Musk turn up to downvote it. I mean, remember, why don't we use giant methane, fossil fuel-powered rockets to replace airplanes?
I mean, that definitely goes against Tesla's green initiatives.
And what was Elon Musk's objection to flying cars? Oh, that's right, they make way too much noise.
And they make a lot of noise.
But flying giant rockets all over the planet, pretty much the noisiest transport on the planet.
We're going to fly BFR like an aircraft.
All the bloody time. Nah, Elon Musk fans love it.
Fly halfway across the globe. You'll be on the BFR for roughly half an hour or 40 minutes. And the longest part of that, yeah, it's so awesome.
Yes, which is completely awesome. Except by the time that becomes practical, we'll all be traveling by personal rocket pack.
The longest part of that flight is actually the boat out and back.
I mean, Gwen, come on. This is awesome, but it's crazy, right? Like, this is never going to actually happen.
Oh, no, it's definitely going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. And there's a very good reason for that. Look, there's been a lot of very, very smart people working on rocketry over the past 50 or so years. There's kind of a practical limit to how safe you can make rocket engines because of the extreme conditions they work under. Which, if you're lucky, means that you're going to blow up about one rocket in every 100. That's not really passenger friendly. If it really was that easy to make rockets that are hundreds to thousands of times safer, I think someone might have worked that out by now.
And let's talk a little bit about the business. Everyone thinks rockets are really expensive, and to a large degree they are.
Yes, they are expensive, which is why this is a really stupid idea. If only there was some sort of dumb justification that would somehow make this dumb idea even dumber.
And how could we possibly compete with airline tickets here? But if you think about it, if I can do this trip in half an hour to an hour, I can do dozens of these a day, right? And yet a long-haul aircraft can only make one of those flights a day.
Well, yes, and if I had transonic solar-powered planes, I could do it even quicker and even cheaper.
So even if my rocket was slightly more expensive and the fuel is a little bit more expensive, I can run 10x at least what they're running in a day and really make the revenue that I need to out of that system.
And a claim that is utterly preposterous, doesn't even hold up to the most superficial of inspections. But God, do Elon Musk fans hate it when you point it out to them. Or his claim that the Hyperloop, it's really not that difficult.
It still sounds pretty complicated, Elon.
It's like a tube with an air hockey table, the high-pressure air buildup on the nose, and pumping it through the air skis. It's really, I swear, it's not that hard.
And what was he going to use for his air bearings? Yes, very high-pressure air, cold gas thrusters. And how far, pray tell, has Elon Musk's easy idea of putting together the Hyperloop come in 5 or so years? He is no closer to building a Hyperloop than Goddard ever was when he proposed the concept of the Hyperloop, or vacuum train, over 100 years ago. But in a wonderful little crossover, turns out one of the Hyperloop entries into Elon Musk's Hyperloop design contest used cold gas thrusters, not for levitation. None of them have managed to do that yet, despite Elon saying how easy it would be to just put little air skis on these things. Now, they used cold gas thrusters for acceleration.
It works like this. 2 high-pressure tanks filled with nitrogen gas empty about 90% of their mass over the course of 3 seconds. As the gas exits, it converts thermal and pressure energy into kinetic energy.
It vented the gas into the vacuum chamber, which of course partially destroys the vacuum. I mean, damn, this is more soapbox derby than the future of transport. So here you can see the true power of a cold gas thruster powering something a little smaller than a Tesla. Okay, a lot smaller than a Tesla. So you can see the rough size of the tank that gets this thing up to an amazing about 40 kilometers an hour. That's less than 30 miles per hour. Yeah, this is also something that drives the Elon Musk fans crazy, is when you tell them that he's not the visionary who invented the Hyperloop. He just took somebody else's idea that was over 100 years old and gave it a new name.
I have a name for it, which is called the Hyperloop.
The Hyperloop?
Hyperloop, yeah.
Oh, genius. It's almost like the reason that no one has ever built one of these 600-mile-per-hour vacuum trains.
The Hyperloop intends to propel passengers through a low-pressure vacuum tube at speeds up to 700 miles per hour.
It's because it's insanely difficult, insanely dangerous, and insanely expensive to do. Seriously, the Hyperloop makes the whole flying cars thing seem like a cakewalk. Or when Elon Musk claimed that he, with no experience, dug his first tunnel 100 times cheaper than all of the world's experts could ever have done. On his very first tunnel.
Normally, the tunnels cost, like I said, up to $1 billion. So like a discount tunnel would be sort of $200 million. But we're able to build this tunnel for about $10 million. So
he claimed that he dug it for 1% of what it would cost real professional engineers to do it. A claim that is preposterous on first inspection. And when you take a look at the actual numbers of what it would cost to dig such a tunnel, you find that Elon Musk's digging costs were almost exactly the same as everyone else's digging costs. Now, Elon Musk isn't a visionary here. He's a fantasist. This isn't science. It's science fiction. The emperor has no clothes on. And when you live in a fantasy land, you could as well go for the flying cars or the supersonic vertical takeoff and landing electric jet.
The ideal long-distance transportation mechanism is a supersonic vertical takeoff and landing electric jet.
Or nuclear-powered commercial airliners.
Are we about to reach new limits with cars? We have supercars. We have hypercars. Is this the start of a new generation of super ultra hypercars? Maybe. And I couldn't be more excited.
Or hell, let's be real, why not go for the thorium-powered cars running on solar freaking roadways? But if you're willing to suspend your disbelief to this extent, I really don't understand why you stop with Musk. I mean, I heard of this amazing new invention from a Stark Industries? Some form of nanotech that allows you to fight space ogres and fly faster than any of Elon Musk's spaceships. You know, Elon Musk's spaceships, the ones that blow over when it gets a little windy. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and ring the notification bell. And if you really enjoyed it, subscribe and maybe consider supporting this channel through Patreon, because it really does give me the freedom to allow projects like this to take shape.